Hello and welcome back to Chip Observer. I'm James Sanders, Senior Analyst on the Executive Insights team for TechInsights. And I'm joined today by Eric Smith, who's the Service Director for PC and Tablets.
Yes, you got that right.
Okay.
That's me.
Okay. And today we're talking about Apple's new MacBook Neo, which is the sort of value line version of the MacBook. It's something that Apple hasn't really been in that price segment before.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, I wrote an editorial about the MacBook Neo, and naturally, you've got your own analysis of it, and we're meeting pretty much in the middle on this. But we've got a couple places where we're a little bit divergent, but that's the fun of analysts. We all have opinions. That's kind of what we're paid for.
Yes.
So
Everyone's got an
first,
opinion, as the saying goes.
yeah, we can publish that. So take me through to the MacBook Neo. Like, from your perspective, as someone tracking, PCs and tablets, what is this and what is the impact of it?
Well, it is such an interesting time for this device to come out, right? I mean, the planning process doesn't happen overnight, but the timing definitely came together. The stars sort of aligned for Apple, where, like you said, they're going into a price tier that they don't normally play in, hardly even in smartphones, to be honest. This is we're talking about something they've never done. So they're really reaching out to a new consumer segment that they're just, they haven't been able to touch at the price points for MacBooks originally. If you look across their portfolio, you could argue, okay, iPad Air starts at $599, with Mac Mini starts at $599, but out of the box, those devices don't offer what the MacBook Neo does, which is a screen, which is a keyboard, which is a trackpad. You'd have to scale up with a Magic Keyboard for $269 to get the iPad Air at least functional hardware-wise. Go ahead and price out what you need for a Mac Mini to do the same. I guess you could make the argument that, okay, the base iPad, the A16 model, if you get the Magic Keyboard Folio, it gets you right to $599. Then it's a question of, well, do you want the full PC experience in Mac OS, or do you want more of a portable touch-first experience in iPad OS? And I think if you listen to the rumors, these are the sorts of things that Apple is wrestling with down the road on whether to, make some changes to their MacBooks in the future, as far as touchscreen or cellular, all of those fun rumors. So get at a consumer segment that is one way or another locked out of the Apple walled garden. Maybe they have an iPhone, maybe they have an iPad somewhere, maybe they have a watch. But their notebooks have been, well out of their price range, right? The new MacBook Air with the M5 chip starts at $1099 now. And, it's in an inflationary environment, and an environment where memory prices are on the rise and likely, bleeding over into retail pricing for PCs. This is really the time to attack the mid-tier. So, how did they get there is kind of the interesting thing, because they limited the amount of RAM on there. It's 8 gigabytes of RAM, which, I mean, that's on the low end of most devices these days being launched. Even in that price range, 16 gigabytes is sort of becoming the standard, certainly on the Windows side. So I'll be honest, I got a review unit, and I was excited to play around with it, because I wanted to see how this 8 gigabytes was gonna, really be able to handle processes. I'm no power user necessarily, outside of what I do at work with, spreadsheets and report writing and this sort of stuff. But personally, I'm not a gamer. I'm not, I browse the web and whatever. And this thing flew. I mean, I was impressed. I try not to buy into the hype on announcements. And Apple's great with selling. They've got a great marketing team. But coming into the skeptical eye, this thing really was able to handle multiple programs open, and no lag, no delay. I think they pulled something off that a lot of their competitors are going to have trouble matching at that price level.
So there's 2 points in that I do want to just kind of pull out and examine in a little bit more detail. The first is the amount of memory, because as you said, like 16 gigabytes is about table stakes. That's the point of entry for a lot of consumer devices at this point. And even Apple had gone from 8 as a baseline configuration to 16. What was it, in the M3 generation for the MacBook Air?
Sounds about right.
Okay. I always get M3 and M4 mixed up, so if that one's wrong, that one's on me. But so they've gone up for the MacBook Air, and the idea that you can do 8 gigs as a really comfortable amount of DRAM in a consumer device for a PC, particularly on Windows, would be a little bit hard. The sort of baseline expectation for what a vanilla installation of Windows 11 is going to consume, and then when you've got a browser on top of that, that can be a little bit challenging at 8 gigs. And certainly with Apple Intelligence, they wanted to increase the amount of memory that they have on device in order to do on-device processing. I suspect that's not really a consideration here. This is the value end segment. But for macOS, I think the baseline expectation of how much memory you're going to have didn't grow in the same way that it has in the progression between Windows 7, 8, 10, and 11.
Yeah.
And because Apple has very tight vertical integration, they control the OS, they control the SoC, they control the packaging. They know what they're building for. Whereas in the Windows PC ecosystem, you've got Microsoft in Seattle, in Redmond.
Yes.
And then you've got a bunch of PC OEMs that are building to the entire gamut of price points. And that disconnect and serving all of those markets equally becomes really challenging. So Apple's vertical integration, is serving them well here, leaving aside the entire, Apple Silicon story, which I've gotten into in Chip Observer before, and we don't have time to go through that at this exact moment.
Yeah.
The other thing is, for a budget device, for a market segment, for a price point that Apple hasn't really played in, and I've gone through the history, like I was trying to find any good comparison.
Right.
And even like the eMac, the education-only iMac that was still using the old CRT, and I'm digging into like the early 2000s, was still priced higher than this. Like, this is really unprecedented for Apple's product history. For the price point, how are PC OEMs possibly going to compete with a $599 price point for 256 gigs of storage and 8 gigs of RAM, and for the education market, they're taking that $100 lower?
Right.
How do you work with that?
I think the mid-tier is a puzzle that is so difficult to solve, especially when, as you said, you've got Microsoft doing their thing on software, you've got each OEM doing their thing on the design, and the chipset vendors doing their own thing from a supply side, right? They've got their own agenda, and the OEM's got to sort of mash all that together and make it work. And so it works on the high end, right? Because yeah, they can put together an impressive machine, and Windows can go through on 16 gigs of RAM or more now, and commercial buyers, which make up the majority plus market of the market, they can pay those premiums, right? When you get down to mid tier, well, no, let's back up a minute. Go down to the lowest tiers. There's an expectation that the quality is going to be really bad, right? You go in, you're paying $200-300 on a device. You're not really expecting that to last for more than a year or two. I mean, to be honest. And you look at a Chromebook in a school, I mean, if it gets through 2 years, I think that's a pretty good return on investment. But it's that mid-tier. It's weird, right? Because it's not cheap enough that it's disposable. It's maybe a bad word, but the expectation is that the quality is not going to be that poor. It should be able to handle itself, but it doesn't have those premium specs that make you feel like, oh, this is a really solid device, right? The body is probably plastic, or some combination of materials that is a little floppy, or your screen isn't as crisp and nice as you'd like it. the battery life, right? There's all these compromises that OEMs have to make. And to your point about vertical integration, Apple was able to button that down in the Neo in a way that I think the competitors are going to be challenged to match that level of experience at that price point. I mean, $599 is like the low end of the mid tier. We call it like, $500 to $800, somewhere in that range. But your question was how are other OEMs going to match that? I don't know that they can. So where the competitor OEMs are going to be able to match them is sort of that lock-in experience of, I'm a Windows user and I will always be a Windows user. It's too hard for me to switch to Chrome or to Mac OS. I think there are a few entry points for Apple to sort of break that. But, Apple hovers around the 10% market share for a reason. One of them is price, but the other is it's not easy to switch OSs, right? The keystrokes are different. You don't know where files are stored. Connections are different, but that's what makes the industry interesting, I guess.
I'm going to put you a little bit on the hot seat because I know you've had a few days to play around with the MacBook Neo, and I know that you've shifted recently at work from going from a Windows user to a Mac user.
Yeah.
And for my part, I've got a Windows PC on my desk right now. This call, I'm on my work Mac. I've got a unifying keyboard, and so I'm constantly switching back and forth between the Mac OS shortcuts and the Windows shortcuts. So whenever I'm trying to, do copy and paste on Windows, I keep thinking I'm on my Mac, and I accidentally open Copilot, and that's never fun for me.
Oh boy.
So when you're doing this conversion, when you're getting used to being in a Mac OS environment after having been a Windows user for, I'll just say years, I'm not going to guess.
Sure. Yeah, nice.
How has that been for you? Like, how much of a learning curve has it been for you to do that?
So, yeah, I'm not going to get into years too, but the last time I actually used a Mac for more than 5 minutes was in elementary school, when a nice, a high school student taught me how to use a spreadsheet. So, yeah, very, very new to the OS, but using it for work, shortcuts are my lifeblood. That's how I stay efficient, and that was a struggle. I feel like after probably 2 weeks, I sort of got the hang of it, and now I can type symbols. I can type an M dash without having to go to the character map or look it up on Google. How do I type an M dash? There are definitely some neat little tricks in the OS that are hidden away. So I would say it's probably helped because I'm an iPhone user. So that sort of seamless experience from iOS 26 to Mac OS 26. I know people have very strong opinions about the what is it, liquid glass design?
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of like it. It's a nice. It feels the same no matter where I am, and that integration of iPhone, iMessage, phone, FaceTime, iCloud. It's a compelling experience. So I see the value in that, and I see why their services business is, what was it, $30 billion last year? So
Last quarter.
There you go, last quarter, yes.
So yeah, I mean, there is a case for the MacBook Neo as being an entry point for Apple services business. You can part it out if you just want iCloud. If you want a little additional storage, you can just do that. If you want Apple Music, you can just do that. Naturally, they've got the bundle of everything, and I'm sure they would be glad if you subscribe to that. So I do see it as that point. We're going to let TechInsights cost modeling team work out what the bill of materials is, what the manufacturing cost is. I'm not going to ask you right now if you think that the margin on this is going to be thinner than, a MacBook Pro. But since you've had this for a few days, I am curious. We were talking about the comparison for like Chromebooks in schools. And a lot of these Chromebooks in schools are very, let's say, ruggedized devices. They're still plastic, but they're a bit more plasticky than you would get on a consumer device because you want a little bit more heft for something that is in the hands of 10-year-olds. I've seen a lot of Chromebooks that have been yeeted across a classroom, and somehow they still operate. The MacBook Neo doesn't really skimp on the design language or the materials that Apple uses in its more expensive Mac products.
Mhm.
Do you think that this is going to be as durable in a classroom environment for like a one laptop per child type of setup where, you know, each kid has their own system? Um, is that going to be durable enough to withstand that type of abuse?
I'll say that when I had, I played around with the Neo with my family, and my son picked it up and was like, "Is this like a Chromebook? Is this supposed to be like a Chromebook?" And kind of nodded, like, "All right, you're picking up something here." Um, I think the design. I mean, it's a solid aluminum body. Wouldn't dare try throwing it around. I have pretty bad luck with dropping stuff, but it feels durable. I mean, it feels like it could take a beating. And we started comparing it. Oh, what's your experience with your Chromebook at school? This research sample of one type of thing. But I mean, yeah, I've seen some pretty beat up Chromebooks in my life as well. Yeah, in my life as well. This thing is solid. The body is solid aluminum. I mean, it feels like the MacBook Pro. I wouldn't dare drop either of them. But I think I feel confident in saying it probably could take a beating. The hinge is pretty solid. I mean, it's not floppy like moves around when you open it up. It's I'd say it probably could survive in a school. Whether a school can afford $4.99 or whatever the bulk discount is beyond that is another question. Maybe we're talking private schools, maybe we're talking about somehow a school district that gets a very nice bump in their budget.
Yeah, what's like main takeaway do you want people to have from this?
Um, I guess, the main takeaway for me is it sort of put the competition on notice. I don't think that they're going to gain a ton of market share off of this, but I think they're going to make some inroads for sure. And the question is, what's the next salvo? What's the response from the competitors? Do they stand still or do they try to match? I don't think they can, but
All right. So they've got a price point, they've got a target market, they've got the OS, and it is actually pretty interesting to point out that this is full featured Mac OS. It's not like the S mode in Windows 10 or Windows 11 where you're only able to do limited things. Like this is a full on computer.
yeah.
And so with that, I mean, what is the response for the OEMs? Like how do you answer this as a product?
Yeah, I think I said earlier, I'm a pretty casual PC user on my own, but I was able to do some, video editing, audio manipulation, video encoding, decoding. It handled it as fast as the MacBook Pro did. I really was shocked. So I don't know. I think the Windows OEMs have their work cut out for them. I think honestly, if I was to there are a couple takeaways here, but a big takeaway of what Apple was able to accomplish is being able to control cost in a high cost environment to get to this entry or mid-tier price point, right? What choices are the other OEMs going to make to defend their market share in a shrinking market against this new entrant? Apple's going to put, they're going to put their foot on the gas on marketing for this. So it's a volatile environment. There's a lot going on in the world: memory, processors, tariffs, supply disruptions, you name it. There's plenty of things happening, and with household budgets on the decline or getting tightened, I don't know. I think the OS lock-in on Windows or Chrome is honestly one of the strongest defenses against the MacBook Neo. I mean, schools use Chromebooks because they're easy to manage. They're very cheap. They're fairly durable. They get the job done. You don't need a lot to write presentations or do a book report or, do physics equations or whatever, right? It's a Chromebook can handle that. But I think it's the experience on the MacBook Neo for perhaps, kids graduating out of high school. What do I use next? Do I go to Windows or do I go to Mac? Well, now I can afford a Mac. So, that door gets open for that customer segment that is budget constrained. I think Apple put their competitors on notice. It's yet to be seen how they're going to handle it in 2026, because there's a lot of announcements coming down the pike. I'll say that.
It's going to be a really interesting year for notebooks, for any OEM trying to compete in a very constrained memory market. And then new announcements from Intel earlier this year, AMD earlier this year on notebook targeted SoCs. We're expecting the Qualcomm, the second generation Snapdragon X SoCs to come into the channel mid this year. That was announced last year, but the lead time between announcement and, product and channels a little bit longer. And then there's, the speculation of MediaTek and NVIDIA going to market with I don't really expect it at this price point, to be honest with you.
No.
I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit higher end, a little bit more gaming focused, maybe a little bit more productivity AI focused, considering, what's buttering the toast at NVIDIA these days. But there's a chance that could wind up in a few interesting products as well. So it's a actually pretty crowded market for SoCs for notebooks in a way that it hasn't been since, I think, the 90s.
It's an incredible time to be covering the industry. And I was wondering what your take was with Qualcomm announcing their full range of X2 chipsets from, is it Extreme, Elite, and Plus? And having that Plus moniker is sort of at this MacBook Neo A18 Pro level of performance and price. If some OEMs want to go after that, how do you feel like that competition stacks up?
It is a really difficult price point to try to compete at, particularly because of where component costs are. If Qualcomm is able to bring this to OEMs in a way that undercuts Intel or AMD, there's a chance that the OEMs can make it make sense financially from a unit economics perspective. I think that there's going to be a little bit of that requires some creative thinking. Instead of doing, full on SSD, maybe you're pairing it with UFS memory and using the Snapdragon chip as the memory controller. So you're cutting down, the SSD controller and the module itself, and you're just directly soldering that NAND to the main board. The more of that you can do, and I think that's a little bit easier to do with things that are in certain ways mobile heritage, like like the iPhone chip that's in the MacBook Neo, or in Qualcomm Snapdragon processors that really were proven out in mobile phones before they were proven out in laptops, even though, if you want to get into the history of things, the mobile design, or the core design was, rather server focused, but that's a trip down memory lane that we don't need to take right now because I get distracted too easily. And with that, I think there's a way that you can do that. I'm not sure that for all of the improvements that Microsoft has made to the compatibility layer for, x86 64 apps on Snapdragon, it's still not the most even experience. They've come a long way. Gaming on that is a little bit harder, I think, than what people would anticipate out of a Windows device, but I'm not sure that you're doing a lot of really intensive gaming on a device at that price point.
I agree.
So if there's, acceptable, adequate, okay performance there, it might work, but it really just comes down to the unit economics. And that's true of any OEM, that's true of any partner that you're using for a CPU. It really just comes down to the unit economics of making these products make financial sense, and getting a margin on top of that makes it worthwhile for them to do. And that's a tighter squeeze now more than ever.
Yeah, well, and you've got Intel supply constrained on the low end, right? They're shifting production to from client CPUs on the low end to feed into data center CPUs. So there are a lot of moving parts that, again, I think lend very well to Apple's timing. But for any company that feels like they can jump in and have a either find a X2 Plus or I don't know, an AMD equivalent to the lower tier Intel chips. There's some definitely interesting design challenges that they'll have to work through to contain costs.
Well, Eric, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today about the MacBook Neo and for
That's
appearing
great.
on the Chip Observer podcast. Hope to have you back sometime soon. But for now, this is the Chip Observer. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.